Alright, so in this part of the tutorial, we're just going to construct an array using a for-in loop. So we're going to first construct an integer array and then a string array. I'm going to show you a couple of cool different things that we can do with each. So this is basically just going to be using the append function and called on an empty array to start off with. So with each iteration, it's just going to add a new value onto the end of the loop, or rather onto the end of the array. So with integers, we can actually use the indexing function, whereas with strings, we can't really. It gets a little trickier. Now we're going to look at a follow-up part to the previous part, and this is going to be constructing an array using a for loop. Okay? So this can be a great way to construct an array of uniform elements. Okay, so these can be elements, if they're going to be numbers, then they can be kind of like a uniform amount apart. So we could construct an array of like 1, 2, 3, etc. up to whatever. But it also makes it difficult to construct arrays of stuff like strings, where you need different string values for each element. Okay, so this has limited uses, but can be extremely useful. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're just going to create this array but not populate it with values yet. So let's say we have this variable, we'll just call this int array. It's going to be an array of type int, and we're just going to initialize it to have no values to start off with. And the way we do that is we just do this. Okay, so we know it's an empty int array. As you can see, nothing in it. Now let's add some values. So we can do this a few different ways, but I think the easiest way we can do this is to use the append function. So when we talked about arrays and constructing arrays in the arrays tutorial, we talked about a few ways to combine elements or combine arrays or add elements to arrays. I think the append function goes particularly well with these loops because it just adds one value at a time to the end of the array. So what we're going to do is we're going to create our for-in, so let's just use index in, and because this is an array, we're starting at 0, and let's just run until 10. So let's just create this array that's going to be 11 elements long, so from 0 to 10. Okay, and remember 0 to 10 inclusive of 0 and 10. So what we're going to do is we are going to say int array dot append, and this, remember, is just going to add a new element onto the end of the array. And what we're going to do is we're just going to do something simple to start off with, and we're just going to append on the current value of index. Okay, so before we run this, let's think about exactly what's happening here. Well, we have first an empty integer array, and now we're using our for loop to add onto the end of our empty array the current index value right now. So let's see, well, indexing starts at, in our case, 0 and runs until 10. It's increasing by 1 each time. So the first iteration, it will add 0. The second iteration, index will be 1, so it will add 1. Third iteration will add 2, then 4, then 2, then 3, then 4, and all the way up until when index finally equals 10, and then we're going to add that to the end. Okay? So if we were to then see what values int array contains, and let's see if it will show up here. It's just going to take a little bit of time to run it. Yeah, there we go. We see that our array, after running through this for loop, now contains all the values 0 through 10. Okay? So this is just a pretty easy and fast way to construct an array. We can specify this to be 100 elements long if we want. We could specify it to be 1,000,000 elements if we want, but I think an array of 1,000,000 integers, 0 through 1,000,000, is a little extreme. I'm not really sure where we'd use such a large array. But yeah, so this is how we construct an array. We can do other stuff with this. So we could say index times 2, and that's fine to do as well. So instead of creating this index or this array of integers that are 0 through 10, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, we're going to take the current value of index and times it by 2 each time. So then see the results. We get this array of numbers increasing by 2. We could do this times 3 or times 4 and see how the values change. We could even do something like index plus 1. So, you know, instead of starting at 0 and going through 10, we start at 1 and go through 11. So there's lots of different things we can do, but basically this is just a fast and easy way to construct an array of uniform values. Again, it gets a little tricky when we have something like this. So let's say we have this string array, and we know it's going to be of type string. Should capitalize that. Okay. If we want to construct a string array, however, if we want to use the loop to do it, then we kind of have to assume that each value is going to be the same. Because then we just do something like, we could do int_array.append, and then we wouldn't even really use the index at all. We could do something like hello. And this just will construct an array of hellos that's 11 elements long. Okay, so, oh, not int array, that's why, string array. There we go. So then if we were to print out string array, then we should just have an array of hello 11 times. And so there you see it. It's just going to say hello 11 times. Okay, so although this does have limited uses, it is extremely helpful when it is useful. So just a quick recap. We started off creating this empty integer array and used this loop to populate it by using the append function. So we basically just added the current value of index onto the end of the array with each iteration. So the first time we were adding a 0 because index is 0 to start off with, then we added a 1, then 2, then all the way through up until 10, and we showed that we can either increase a count by 1 each time, so the current value of index, or we could do kind of like an index times 2 if we want an array of 0, 2, 4, 6, 8, and so on. So there's a few different things we can do there. We also saw that with string arrays we can kind of construct string arrays the same way, but bear in mind that because we're no longer using the changing value of index, we kind of have to construct an array of all the same values. Now we could also do this with stuff like booleans, characters, floats and doubles and stuff like that, but again the same thing with booleans and characters. It will generally have to be the same unless you can do some kind of like alternate function where you have, you know, for the even indexes you have like a true value, for the odd indexes you have false, but that's a little more complicated. Okay, so I'll leave you guys to play around with this a little more, try some cool stuff. So try to create string arrays where you can kind of alternate what strings you're adding rather than adding the same string a bunch of times. Otherwise go nuts. I really recommend you practice with this, because once you master this technique down, you can construct arrays so quickly and so easily. Alright, so that's how to construct arrays with for loops. Next we'll be looking at including conditional statements within for loops, or rather within these for in loops. Right, so this part of our tutorial involved constructing an array with a for in loop. So we first did this with an integer array. So basically within the for in loop we just kind of appended the current value of index onto the end of our array. So this just took an empty array and starting at index 0 it added 0 onto it, then it added a 1, then a 2, and so on and so forth up until we ran 10 times, or we ran the loop 11 times. So it just constructed an array 11 elements long with the numbers 0 through 10. Then we showed that you can do stuff like multiplying the index by 2 if you want to create arrays that are 0, 2, 4, 6 and so on and so forth, and some other stuff that we can do. We also construct an array of all the same elements using a string array. So again we start off with an empty array and we just added the same string onto it each time. And unfortunately using a for in loop to construct an array of strings is a little restrictive in that unless you kind of add some complicated conditionals and stuff into it, you get an array of all the same values. But once we introduce the if statements into for loops, or these for in loops, then we can kind of see that we can change up the string arrays a little bit and add some more complicated values to it. Okay, so this was just how to construct an array using for in loops.